welcome to the Ledgy webinar. I am very excited to welcome Marcel Scheurer today. Marcel is the COO of Codility, and he's joining us from San Francisco today. So thanks a lot for participating to this webinar, Marcel.
You're most welcome, Yoko. Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me.
And today we will, first of all, learn more about Codility's story and product, and also about Marcel himself. Then in a second step, I will be interviewing Marcel about the topic of ownership and equity at Codility. And at the end, as usual, we will take a couple of questions, so feel free to already type them in the Q&A window. And as usual, also the upload will be available at the end, so you can check it out later on as well. All right, so Marcel, let's kick this off. And first of all, my first question for you would be, Codility is one of the most successful scale-ups from Europe originally. And you are serving clients such as Slack, Microsoft, and Tesla. And can you, in a few words, tell us about what Codility is all about?
So I think in very simple terms, what Codility does is that we provide a SaaS platform that evaluates technical skills of software developers. So it's a platform that you can leverage when hiring for software developer roles in any location, run them through screening tests, and also through a remote interviewing environment.
That's great. And what would be sort of the the key benefits that Codility provides to companies?
It's mainly related to three things. So first of all, you're able to narrow down the funnel of candidates much faster, which means that you are able to speed up the time to hire by maybe a factor of 2 to 3. Mm-hmm. Given the very detailed analysis of the individual skills, you're also able to reduce the risk of a mishire by what we estimate, based on feedback we receive, by around 20%. And very, very importantly, with all the attention that the diversity, equity, and inclusion topic receives currently, with a solution like ours, you're able to remove any unconscious bias that you might have in your recruiting process. So overall, that allows you to optimize time invested in hiring, and then saving a lot of engineering hours and recruiting hours in the process. Plus, of course, important in these days, you're enabled to manage the entire process remotely.
Absolutely. Great. And so you, Marcel, you have been a leader in the tech industry for many years already. And I'd be very curious to hear what motivated you personally to join Codility.
In the beginning, it was the simplicity of the product. So it solves a real problem that I knew from previous roles, and the company has a very interesting background of bootstrapping for almost 10 years before taking on the first external venture capital funds approximately 18 months ago.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and we've had the chance to speak about a bit before the start. And also, my second question, Marcel, about your experience would be, so as a leader for many years in the tech industry, could you share with our audience one of the biggest challenges you faced during your career in Scale Up so far, and what you learned from it?
So I think it's the experience at fast-growing companies. I think many, certainly you and many people among the audience probably share that. It almost feels like a succession of crises, that one happens after the other throughout time. And it's every single day I still obviously learn new things, which is the exciting part of being the exciting part of being able to participate in such journeys. But generally, I think the most challenging topic for me still is to stay ahead of the game in terms of building the organizational structure together with the rest of the executive and the wider management team, and also build the talent and develop the talent for the next growth phases.
And speaking about staying ahead of the game, what would you say are your top goals at Codility for 2021 as its COO?
It's mainly this year, so I need to adopt a more quantitative and database decision making approach. And again, related to what I mentioned before, work with the exec and the management team to determine what sort of the organizational requirements and also the business model that we need to put in place to be ready for the growth that we expect to happen in the coming quarters and years.
Great, can't wait to see what this year will bring at Codility. All right, thank you so much for sharing these insights, Marcel. And now I would like to switch gears a little bit and speak about the topic of ownership. And to give a bit of context to our audience, currently Codility has more than 150 employees across 4 countries, including Poland, the UK, Germany, and the US. And I'm very interested in learning how about you approach the topic of equity ownership in such an international and remote company. And my first question really would be, as a distributed global company, do you notice any difference in the way Codility approaches the topic of ownership?
So first of all, it's important to say that every single employee is a stock option holder at Codility. So every employee, independent of role, function, level, or location, is a beneficiary of the stock option plan. We have the same underlying plan in place globally, but there are certainly differences in the policies around determining the actual grants for specific roles. But overall, I think the function is a stronger driver than the geography. So especially in today's world where recruiting market and the talent market is becoming increasingly global.
I see. And what would you say are the challenges of granting ownership in different jurisdictions, and how did you overcome them?
So I think we will touch upon let's say the emotional standpoint later on, but from a technical point of view, it's the different regulatory bases, different legal structures, and ultimately also the tax treatment for the company as well as the best beneficiaries across the different geographies or countries. Often then directly also related to under what terms are you allowed to grant the options. Let's say what's the minimum strike price. How to address these challenges? I think it's what probably can't be avoided. That is, that you have to spend quite a bit of money on legal advice, on lawyers to establish the various share plans, but especially also the different option agreements or grant documents for the various jurisdictions. So that could be you certainly have different grant structures required in Switzerland, let's say, versus EMI share plans in the UK, or ISO non-statutory share plans in the US. So it takes quite a bit of investment of setting up the templates to be able to really scale that across a global team.
So many jurisdiction and legal challenges, but it is possible, and everyone at Codility holds shares or stock options as of now.
Exactly, and we had a bit of cleanup to do last year, and it took us maybe in the end 3 to 4 months to set up all the documents from scratch and provide all the grants, also historic ones to the people. So it can be done. It's a bit painful. You need to obviously be careful to not let the legal support go too far, and keep a close eye on it, so that you have control in which direction the cost goes versus the initial estimate.
Absolutely. And now, as you mentioned before, I'll be interested in learning about the emotional side or the perceived value from your employees. And Codility's main market is the US. And do you notice any difference in interest for the topic of equity depending on the country the employees based in?
That's a very interesting question. It's generally the perceived value of stock option plans is certainly much higher in the US versus in our case Poland. UK is much closer to the US. But this at the same time also drives the expectation of candidates and employees to participate in the company success, which is certainly a positive thing if you can enable that. It's probably related to the overall maturity of the venture capital industry and the tech ecosystem in a particular country. So that people tend to understand or tend to put a higher perceived value to stock options when there has been more successful exits within a specific ecosystem. So it seems more tangible to have successful examples close by. So that's maybe what explains that. Switzerland, it's somewhere in between, I would say. So it's a bit. I think there has been quite a few exits throughout the last couple of years, but there's still a bit of reluctance to see options directly as part of the overall compensation package at the fast-growing startup technology company.
What would you say is this reluctance about in Swiss companies?
I think it's just it really doesn't feel real until you really see that there's value associated with a stock option plan. I think it's and again the more exits that will happen of companies that were founded and with a large number of employees in Switzerland, the more people will start to see that this value can be real for not just as for an abstract instrument as a company, but for people as individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the topic of making the value and the meaning of stock options more transparent to employees is one of the core of what we do at Ledgy. And this is actually a great segue into the next topic. And as you know, we're extremely happy to count Codility among one of our users for almost a year now. And I'd be very curious to hear how you at Codility tackled the topic of equity management before using Ledgy, and what triggered the decision to introduce Ledgy and roll it out to employees.
So as I mentioned, it was a bit of a messy situation until about a year ago. So historically, and as was also said, Codility has been around for almost 10 years already. Before we had Ledgy, everything was managed in various Excel sheets, some Google sheets, some on more local sheets across various functions, teams, and locations. And we had to do a major cleanup and consolidation of all the data, of all the information. We looked at several tools at that time, but I think Ledgy really convinced us by we were able to very easily adopt it. So I really like the simplicity of the user interface. I was very impressed by the customer support during testing, during the trial. So it was great to get very very instant feedback on questions that we had, because that was particularly important to us because we had a very tight deadline to implement the structure. Plus, Ledgy also supports non-US types of option schemes, which many other applications do not necessarily allow to be covered. And maybe something I shouldn't say, but the price point also seemed very fair.
Great, yes. And also related to that topic, as you mentioned, it helped to bring more clarity and transparency among your employees. I'd be very curious to learn, if I am a newly started employee at Codility, how would I learn about stock option at Codility? Do you have any best practices to share on employee education on that topic?
I don't think what we do is best practice. So it's something that we should, now that you asked the question, it's something that I realize I need to become better at. We invested a lot of time in educating and explaining to the people a year ago when we installed the plan and the legal structure around it. So we had a lot of sessions across multiple teams. We had FAQ documents accessible to all. We have dedicated email address mailbox to ask questions, which is covered by the stock option plan administrator. But now that you say you need to become much better also during the onboarding process of new employees, currently we have a very brief session on explaining what the structure looks like, but I'm not sure if it's necessarily best practice. But what really helps here, and what was one of also the decision criteria, is that Ledgy makes it much more tangible and understandable, especially regarding all the questions that you will receive regarding individual vesting schedules, regarding individual grants. If you have different installments of grants, they're even by promotions, they're even by change of roles. So that makes it much more transparent, and again also tangible to see how is that related to the fundraising history of your specific company.
Great. Well, Marcel, thank you so much for this great conversation. And now I would love to give the audience a chance to ask any questions. So feel free to type them in. I see one question here. Yes, so over the years, has Codility noticed the role equity plans plays on its platform? Are more companies providing equity in their benefits package, and are more candidates expecting it? Very interesting question.
So Codility might be a bit of a special case here, especially because they expanded into the US very early on and sort of met this increased expectation of especially senior candidates to be participating in the company's success. And Codility already from its first days on provided stock options to each and every employee. So that was something that was very close to the founders' heart, to have everybody participate in the success. So there was no moment in time or no specific trigger point that said, okay, now we need to install it. It was something that was there and important to the founders from the very beginning.
Got it. We have one more question I see here. Do you think that companies that offer equity compensation have a competitive advantage over other employers?
It depends on what type of talent you're looking for, what you consider your competitors. So I think it's in a fast growth environment where you can end up doubling your team and your company in various metrics year over year. it's certainly an extremely important instrument to align the incentives across the organization. So, and saying that it certainly represents, I think, a competitive advantage, and it also attracts a certain type of risk-seeking talent, which you need at certain phases of the of your company's growth. So I'm not necessarily sure if I would want to say that it's a competitive advantage per se, because I feel the people that work at fast growth tech companies are per se a different type of group. But if you compare fast growth tech companies one to another, if one offers a stock option plan versus one don't, then you certainly absolutely have an advantage.
Great. I see a lot of questions now coming in. I would say let's take one more. So yes, I think this one is interesting. So there are actually two that are similar, and it's about liquidity and secondaries. And the question is, are you thinking about offering employee secondaries to make the ESOP value more tangible?
Well, very good point, and especially it starts to feel much more real and much more tangible if it hits your bank account. So we had a secondary component already in the course of our Series A 18 months ago, which was open to each and every option holder that held vested shares at that time. So there was no very open to everybody, so to speak. We'll certainly include a secondary component as well during Series B, and I would strongly recommend for everybody to do that, exactly for the reason that was stated, that it makes it feel much more real at that time also.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Marcel. And to be mindful of time, we will conclude the Q&As here. But Marcel, thank you again so much for sharing all these insights with us. And would you have, a last top one advice you could share with all global leaders of scale-ups here listening about the topic of ownership?
So I think apart from using stock options in general as an instrument to align interests across the team, as we discussed before, I think, and it's important to establish transparency in your option plan and its administration from the very beginning. So I've been on the receiving end of various cleanup exercises, also some of the messes in previous roles I created myself, and also had to clean them up afterwards. You will need a clean cap table when you go out and raise funds, and don't get the cap table from your lawyers. They will for sure get it wrong. And if you don't have a clean cap table, at some point it will catch up with you. In the worst situation, you miscalculated the fully diluted share price, which doesn't make you look good at all. Or you might run into a situation where you actually granted more than you had available in your pool, or probably even worse, you don't even know anymore who you granted what under which terms, or any combination of the above. So I would just recommend the very moment that you start installing an option plan, establish the single source of truth for all the data, for all the terms, for all the documents. So it will pay off. So.
Great, great advice. Thank you very much. And Marcel, thank you again really for participating to this webinar. Thank you to you listeners as well. And as usual, you will find this video on our YouTube channel. So check it out over there, and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Yoko. Really enjoyed the conversation.